Let's move on to international sales contracts. And one of the instruments that people use, it's actually third party down. One example is the United Nations Convention on Contracts for the International Sale of Goods, CISG. You will hear that mentioned in various avenues. And this is probably the prevailing side. Just like we talked about GATT before, this prevails in terms of the international sales of goods. GATT was more of a policy thing. This is about specific contracts. So a contract for the sale of goods is one of the various legal transactions people enter into in their daily lives. A contract of sale entails necessarily the transfer of title to property in goods sold. Again, to go back, even when we go into a shop and we say, I'll have a packet of biscuits, please, and I'll have these biscuits, and we give the money, we have entered into a contract. Okay, we might not have, but the contract is implied. We haven't seen it in writing. We're not going to sign a piece of paper or everything that we agree to buy, but essentially we have entered into a contract, and that contract is actually covered by the Consumer Goods Act and that type of thing. So we are protected, both parties are protected, but essentially it's a contract. Might not be a piece of paper, but it is a contract. What we're looking at here is more complex sales where we'd look for a piece of paper for sure, or certainly electronic contract printed out as we've spoken about. But a contract of sale between parties whose places of business are located in different states, and by that I mean different countries as well, it's an international one. You know, you get somewhere like the US where different regulations apply to different states and things like that. But here, particularly in Asia, we're talking about international contracts. In such a case, different legal systems and backgrounds are involved, and it is necessary to find the common ground between contracting parties. So, for example, if I am in Sydney, Australia, and my client is in Malaysia, then chances are this might need a discussion, because I would want this to be covered by Australian law, and my client would probably want it to be covered by Malaysian law. So that is a discussion to have. Usually the vendor, the supplier, will want the governing country, if you like, to be where they're actually based, because they understand the law there, they understand what's happening. And of course, it works the other way around for the buyer, because they're bringing products into their country, and or could be bringing services from overseas into their country. So that can take some negotiation, but generally, I'd say more generally, it's covered by the location in which the vendor resides, the supplier. Several international instruments dealing with different core issues related to rights and duties of parties have been elaborated to guide international access. So there's been lots of different, I mentioned the CISG, there's been lots of things like that. We might see that in a video in a little while if we get time. But however, the other thing to bear in mind is a lot of these instruments don't actually cover the transfer of property. So there's often a question surrounding when a service or a product actually changes hands. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So even though it's central to the contract of sale, one may rightly argue that contracting parties must envisage in their sale contract clauses related to the transfer of ownership of the goods. So the contract needs to basically identify when the exchange will take place. Whether that's during production, partway through production, 95% way production, on handover, on completion, whatever it might actually be. And bear in mind, we've got international borders in between all of these transactions as well. Shipping, is it when a a product is shipped, or is it when it arrives in my hands? When does it actually take place? And surprisingly, this issue is often overlooked by parties when they enter into commercial contracts. It's complicated enough locally, but when international borders are concerned, people in different countries are concerned, then you know, it's a different point. I'm sure a supplier would love transfer of ownership to take place when their product leaves the factory. But also the buyer would want the transfer of ownership to take place when it arrives at their destination. And I can understand that from both parties, but it needs to be agreed. And if it's not agreed, if it's not covered by the contract, we're going to have all sorts of fun and games trying to work it out.